Hello from the Center for Contemporary Mysticism. My name is Joe Irwin, and I'm pleased to welcome you to another great online program. Today we're honored to have as our guest political scientist, author, and distinguished professor Penny Gill, who has taught European and comparative politics at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts for over 3 decades. However, today she is retired and will be coming to us from her home on Madeline Island, Wisconsin, out in the middle of Lake Superior. Penny will be joined by our center board member and interviewer Patricia Pierce to discuss her new book, which is based upon conversations with her Tibetan teacher Manjushri. With her vast experience in global politics, I think Penny will be an excellent person to help us look at some of the radical changes taking place not only here, but around the world, and not only socially and morally, but even politically and existentially. She is a good one to help us ask questions like, could the societies which we have created be based on ideas and institutions which are no longer sustainable? And how can we each be a force for good in the changes that are inevitably coming? So we're very pleased to have Penny as our guest today, and I'll turn it over to Patricia to welcome Penny.
Thank you, Penny, for agreeing to talk with me today. I've been looking forward to our conversation very, very much. And I want to just alert our audience that you live on Madeline Island, Wisconsin, and your Wi-Fi is a little bit unstable, which happens when you're on an island. But we're going to just do our best. So I'm so glad that you're able to be with me today. And you wrote this amazing book, channeled this amazing book, called What in the World is Going On? Wisdom Teachings for Our Time. And I would love for you to just start off by telling us that story and how that came about.
And how it came about. First of all, I have to say, I've been really looking forward to doing this with you. I've so loved our conversations over the years. I had arrived at the island. This is a wonderful little cabin, and I used it in the summer times for many years. And I've now retired here, so I now live on the island. But I came here at the end of the academic year, and I was very distressed. We had invaded Iraq. I had just finished teaching an absolutely terrifying seminar on radical ecology. I was pretty distressed about the state of the world and what the United States was doing in that world. And I started, as I often did, to just write like crazy in my journal every morning, trying to clear that out so I could have a wonderful summer in my kayak and with my island friends and stuff. And 3 or 4 days, I'm writing away and dumping all this rage and frustration and sense of powerlessness and doom. And I heard this voice inside of me. Well, that's not really how we see this. And I was quite jolted. And I just stopped. I wasn't ready to explore that. I did not know what this was about. And that went on 3 or 4 mornings. And each time I'd get up, I'd shut my journal and go for a walk, trying to get that energy out of my system. Finally, I gave in. I said, so would you like to explain to me what you mean when you say that? And I started receiving this quite amazing set of teachings about how that other realm understands the big picture on the planet. And after several weeks of this, and it was extremely intense, I would receive some information for a half an hour, and then literally for the rest of the day I'd be on the sofa. I'm really pretty much unable to move because the energy was so extraordinary. And one day I was cautious about this, as you can hear. I said, so what should I call you? I had been writing in my journal, honored sir. It was a very male voice, no question about it. Honored sir. And I was scared to ask who he was. And he said, well, the Tibetans call me Manjushri. And I didn't know who or what that was.
That was not a name you were familiar with.
Not a name I knew. And I had certainly been exposed to things Tibetan and, you know, and I had been channeling at that point, or receiving teachings or care or guidance was really how I would have named it, for about 3 or 4 years from Kuan Yin.
Mm.
And that just seemed like a normal part of every morning, was to have a little time with Kuan Yin.
Mm.
But this was radically different energy and a radically different kind of information. And the Kuan Yin teachings were a little more, were very personal, directed to me. And it was easier for me to think, this is some deep part of my own psyche that is speaking to me, you know, some wiser adult self I should get to know better. You know, I didn't have to really
You
deal
didn't have
with
to go there.
with the cosmological questions.
Right.
But I really didn't think I had an inner Manjushri. But his view, I know, it's crazy. But his view, his reframing about how the world worked was so spectacular. And I knew this wasn't coming from me. There was no place in me that could write those sentences. And I just knew that. So not only did I receive a life-changing, worldview-changing understanding of what's going on, but it exploded all of my regular 20th, first century understandings about reality.
Yes.
And I'm an old academic, I'm an old social scientist, you know. I had a lot of very clear ideas about these things. So
Right.
that's how it happened.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, is there any way that you can describe that energy? You say it was really different from anything that you'd experienced before.
What a great question. It has really changed now. But the energy felt potent. It felt like it took no prisoners energy. It's very strong and abrupt and gorgeously clear and transparent. And no place to hide, no place to dally around. It was take it or leave it energy.
Wow.
Now the energy, you know, if I ask Manjushri for a teaching about something, I mean, it still has that profound sense of other, and I still feel that profound sense of respect, not devotion, but respect. That it's wonderful, it's calming, it's organizing for me, but it doesn't blast me out.
Yeah.
I don't have to take a nap afterwards.
So we're going to get into the content of what you received. I'm curious, do you think that shift in your experience of the energy has to do with your own attunement more to it?
Largely, although a couple of times, maybe 3 or 4 times over the years, because this started in 2006. And I discovered that this morning. I had been thinking 2010. I was way off. But I came across something that I had written in 2006, and it was about this meeting. I think, anyway, 3 or 4 times during that, especially the early years, he would comment on how exhausted I was. And he said, we are not in sync yet. He said, I need to adjust the frequency that I'm using.
So he accommodated.
And he accommodated.
Energy.
And I think over the years, I have met fewer barriers up. And we have a cordial and very courteous relationship and way of talking with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And and he now once in a while, especially if I ask, he prefers that I ask about everything. But he has even given me some very good advice about handling the complexities of this year, the pandemic um, and the racial justice stuff that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, I've been working on a new website, et cetera, et cetera. And this was because he asked me to.
Uh-huh.
I have been doing this in response. He said, things are changing very, very fast on the planet. And we would really appreciate it if you would create a vehicle so that we could send a teaching every week.
Fabulous.
And I said, if that's what you want, absolutely.
Great.
So
at this point, you can pose a question and you receive a teaching around it.
exactly.
I mean, it's like you've got your own mentor. Really.
Yes.
Yeah.
And over the years, I've had people say, I really need to know something about such and such a personal item or a personal decision or something like that. I have never agreed to do that. I have felt some inhibition that somehow that's disrespectful of this energy.
Mm-hmm. I can understand that because the teachings that you have received are so global and really looking at the big picture. And so you, at the time that you started receiving these teachings, you were still on the faculty at Mount Holyoke, right?
Yes, right.
And so you were sort of, I suppose, clandestinely receiving these teachings.
Oh, you bet.
This is not something you bring up at a faculty meeting, right? So you had this other part of your life that was going on parallel with your academic career. And that, I'm sure, was an interesting dynamic to navigate. But I want to really get to the content of the teachings. So what Manjushri told you when he said, that's not the way we see it. And first of all, let me just say, for those who are watching this interview, that I highly, 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 highly recommend this book. I've read it probably 5 times at least. It's astonishing. And so, how is it that your worldview became challenged? What was he saying to you that totally transposed the way that we can look at what's happening?
Oh, that's a beauty, Patricia. I'll need to talk a little bit about the main theme of the book.
Yep.
If that's okay.
Absolutely.
I think the main theme of the book is actually my answer to your question, which is that Manjushri said there is an enormous planet-changing shower of spirit underway. And by that, he talks like a physicist half the time. And he said, but by that, we mean there is enormous new energy flooding the planetary system, flooding Earth, and it is of a much higher frequency, and it will be very powerful, and it will be very transformative, and it is on behalf of radically changed consciousness for human beings. So we can talk about that more. I'd love to. But to answer your question, I'd been teaching political science for 40 years when all of this started. I had a strong understanding of the interconnections of a political economy and development and democratization and globalization. I mean, those were my daily mantra words. And here is this extraordinary, persuasive teacher that the main driver of change on the planet is coming from off the planet. Mm-hmm. And it's not that it was that the transformation was going to be done for us, but that we were going to be forced to respond to great energetic shifts. So start out thinking the planet has energy? Really? Mm. The planet is vulnerable to extraterrestrial energies? Really? So those were the initial wickedly wild questions. Mm-hmm. And then he went on, and I am born a skeptic. I am such a skeptic about just about everything. I was the perfect victim for these teachings.
Yes.
Because if I could
this
get
woman
there
is most gullible, if we can get her on board, like we're good to go.
Then we're going to have lots of other people. It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
He also said that one of the reasons they picked me was that because I'd been teaching political science so long, I had all the words. They liked my vocabulary.
Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious. I thought that was really funny. When I started skeptically thinking I could count on both hands the number of people that I thought could really open willingly to some dramatic change of energy that's laced with spirit, whatever that would mean. So I was dragging my feet, and Manjushri said, no, you don't understand. There are lots and lots of people who are going to have many responses to this new energy. There's a huge range of responses. And some people, he said, actually like you and your friends, your 10 people, are going to really get with this and be intrigued and try to receive it and try to work with it. He said many people will just miss the call and it will go by and they'll die and they'll come back with better equipment for receiving this new energy and working with it. And he said, and there will be major resistance to it. And that will trigger a lot of violence because the energy requires a response. And, so this is 15 years ago. Every morning I go to the New York Times and the Guardian and think, it's all there.
It is. I was just going to ask that the resistance, it's the resistance to the energy. It's the resistance to the energy. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because it's something unfamiliar. Mm-hmm. Okay.
It sounded practically physiological to me.
Yeah.
He would say not everybody has good enough equipment to receive this energy.
Okay. Now, so when we look at on this plane, when we look at what's happening, mm-hmm. we see all of this conflict, we see all of this collapse, all of this division and everything. And you have told me that actually the teachers feel really, really happy about what's going on.
They are.
So could you speak to that?
Yeah, gladly. So one of the things that he told me early on was that there would be violent responses to the new energy because it was so confounding, because it was so challenging. And so that that was extremely helpful to me to see the real meaning of backlash and what backlash really is. And it's being terrified of not being able to survive. And that makes compassion possible. That makes patience possible. So, I just lost track of your question. Sorry, Patricia.
Just that the teachers are happy with this
Oh,
collapse.
right. For now, this moment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They're really happy. So one of the things they've been saying repeatedly now for several months is that yes, we're witnessing the destruction, they would say, of the American empire. They would also say of most of the major practices of modernity. I mean, this is huge. We're in something huge. And that they welcome the destruction because they are not fans of the consequences of certain forms of global capitalism and hyper individualism and the prevalence of markets. Those are their three big complaints. And they see these things being undermined and unable to respond, unable to tend to the community the way they say they do. They are not producing human good. And what this great, huge catastrophe is revealing is that all the rest of us are learning that. It is happening right in front of our eyes. So that's one thing. That's part of the new consciousness emerging. And then the second thing is, as if this destruction of habitual social, political, and economic practices makes room to create new forms. And that many, many people in the world, as we speak, are doing that. Mm-hmm. Are thinking about it, imagining it, choosing priorities. And so I don't think the teachers are rejoicing at the suffering, but they're outside of time and they see what the possibilities are for us to become much bigger selves, to recognize, your most important teaching, to recognize and celebrate and work with our interdependence and to undermine the world that is totally based on a very shrunken understanding of ego.
Yes.
So it ties in so beautifully with your work, Patricia. Someday you should let me interview you.
I look forward to that.
I think that would be really fun.
So I've been thinking a lot about how these things that they mention in terms of the market capitalism, the hyper individualism, the globalization of capitalism, of that system.
Right.
That really the United States is the epicenter of those.
You bet.
Of those patterns, and I've really been thinking about how it makes total sense that in this crisis, the United States would experience the most turbulence, because the very thing that we've kind of built our society around and our cultural mythos around are the things that need to be released, and the systems that have been built up around those ideas are not systems that can support what wants to emerge. A lot of Manjushri's teaching, well, let me back up for a moment and say, you mentioned that a lot of people are working on and imagining what these new systems can be. And that's not really something that we hear about very much. What we hear about in the media is the collapse. We hear about the stuff that induces fear. And Manjushri talks a lot about fear, and that's part of what one of the ways we can contribute right now is to manage the fear. Could you speak to that part of it?
Ooh, yeah, that's huge. And well, he makes a long argument, but it's really the core of the book, that fear is the handiwork of a very small and frightened ego, and that would be a topic for another conversation and an important one. And also that most of our political and economic institutions are solidified fear. They're meant to protect that lonely self. What what we are watching now, I believe, is the collapse of those things, which is allowing us to recognize that even though they were intended to protect us, they actually are destructive. And so our fear is not being encapsulated in those institutions anymore. It's recognizing that that was a really bad agreement we made. That was not a good social contract we signed. And so we're pretty much, in a state of nature, I think. Hobbes could almost appreciate where we are in the United States right now. And so now our fear, our vulnerability is so intense. And it's not created by a shrunken little nasty bit of ego. This is about survival and security for ourselves and the people we love. Mm-hmm. And I think people all over the country are recognizing we're in this together. And that's the turn that has been impossible to make since the 17th century because of American exceptionalism. And if you found a country on the twin foundations of genocide and slavery, you are going to have to just soak the country in violence in order to maintain that kind of inequality and that kind of an oppressive system. And now the descendants of the people who did that are feeling the same lack of freedom and security and well-being. Yeah. It's an awesome moment. It's an awesome moment.
It truly, truly is. And yeah, that American exceptionalism, which is another permutation of hyper-individualism.
Absolutely.
Setting ourselves apart from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And I look at the graphs, with COVID right now, and the U.S. is exceptional in that.
We're number one.
And we're number one, not in the ways that we would prefer to be. So I want to come back, though, to the fear thing, because that is something that we each experience on a very individual level, and that it's a physiological experience, too. And in terms of opening to the energy, when we're in a state of fear, we're constricted and can't really, open and adapt. So are there ways that you personally help people who might really be suffering and struggling with fear, and what to do with that, how to meet that?
Well, I think that I am such a passionate believer in reframing, because if this is just a story about chance and bad guys and unfairness, we're never going to get anywhere. But if this is a story that carries deep meaning, that this is, as Martin Luther King used to say, the arc of history is long, but it's going in one direction. If this is about recognizing our interconnectedness, and that there's enormous well-being there, and that actually our ancestors knew this. In a funny way, it's going back to pick up deep, deep understandings in every indigenous culture and bringing it forward to something that fits our civilization. It's really interesting that those are the values and the practices and the mental openings now that are required. Well, we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And if some, people don't like to talk about fear. Americans don't like to talk about how they're frightened,
Mm-hmm.
because it's about weakness. It's about not being fit. It's very Darwinian,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we have leadership that are afraid to put a mask on because their masculinity might be questioned.
Mm-hmm.
Good grief.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's suffering. That's serious suffering.
Yeah.
So the fears that I think are harder to help respond to, aside from really acknowledging them, and people who are so afraid of losing their homes or of losing loved ones, and it shows to me that our culture needs to do some major work about death and major work on a social safety net. Mm-hmm. I have really close connections in Norway, and not only were they simply brilliant, I think they had 196 deaths out of 5.5 million people. But part of that is that life is never on the edge the way at least 50 or 60 million Americans are on the edge right now.
Right.
So the fear is a symptom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And has wanted to, because that's a way of controlling people's behavior.
Right.
I mean, look at Portland this weekend. Mm-hmm. That's about trying to increase people's fear. It's terrorizing a population.
Yeah, right. So you're still, you said that you received some information about the pandemic and about the uprising in the wake of George Floyd's murder, or at least around the issue of racism. What are you getting around that?
I actually haven't. I asked. It's on our to-do list. I asked Manjushri 4 or 5 days ago, and I said, there are 2 really big things going on here, and I really, really need some teaching. And he said, yes, we will do that, but it hasn't happened yet, except I read your last blog post about healing crisis, and I know that I have a teaching about that. And I have been trying to get my hands on it. I can't find it. My laptop isn't searchable.
Okay.
But I think it's a wonderful metaphor that the whole country is in a healing crisis. And the other thing is that it's in the book. I asked Manjushri towards the end of all that work what he thought about overpopulation and what can the earth carry.
Yeah.
And I remember so distinctly, and he said, well, this is momentary, and the earth will tend to this. You are still a mammalian species, and these things balance themselves out. He said, first of all, a lot of souls wanted to be here for this moment, and they will leave. And secondly, he said, just because you are a biological species, there will be great plague and there will be famine that will even out the population load. And that made sense to me intellectually, but I let it go. But it really came roaring back to me this winter.
Yeah.
The birth rates are just crashing.
They are crashing across the world. Yeah.
All over the world.
Plummeting birth rates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was a red flag or maybe a green flag. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, now that you have your website up, you'll be able, when you receive those teachings about these issues, those will be available on the website.
They'll go right up, and I have probably 5 or 6 that I've received in the last month that are ready to go up.
Okay.
So I will be, now that the website is live, that's today. This is a wonderful celebratory moment. And you can access that new website. It's very simple. It's www.thewisdomteachings, plural, all one word, .org. And you'll get right there.
Excellent. And people can sign up for your email list to receive.
Can indeed. Yep.
Yeah. So,
and then they'll hear every time I post another piece of the teachings.
Great. So you, Penny, have traveled quite a journey from when you first started receiving this information, when it totally turned your perceptions or your perspectives on their heads about what was happening. When you look at what's happening now, what is are you looking at the world consistently through the Manjushri lens, or do you find yourself sort of going back and forth between, things are falling apart, the sky is falling, to, the earth is like emerging into a greater consciousness?
Well, they're not contradictory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have to say, I've been pretty calm and cool until sending the camouflage troops into Portland, and I went to pieces. Mm-hmm. I've taught Europe in the 1930s a lot, and that is such an image. It gives me goosebumps now, and I'm sure it will be stopped, but it's doing deep damage to the very notion of civilian government. And if we can't protect that one, there won't be anybody around to really, really receive the new energy who isn't in terror. And I think it really, so I guess the answer to your wonderful question is, it takes a little work. I think I've really upped my spiritual practice. Also, I'm retired. I live alone in the most beautiful place on the planet. I have, about Lake Superior is 25 yards away. So there is deep sanity all around me, and it has enabled me to go quite deep. So maybe that's my life path now, is trying to stay as rooted and grounded as I can, both in order to be able to receive the teachings, but also to be able to share them. Because we need more people who act like trees to hold the calm.
Yes.
So that there are places where people can think and dream and cooperate and collaborate. Yeah. This is going to take a couple generations. He said that to me a couple days ago. He said, "You're going to get to see the beginning of this, and then you'll leave." And he said, "But don't worry, you'll be back. You'll get to see more." It's a huge vision of time. It's a huge vision about time and the self moving in and out of active human life. I think that view is what is so stabilizing. And most of the world holds that view. It's just the West that doesn't.
Right. That's right. Well, what you're saying about deepening your own spiritual practice, and I really feel that it's, the spiritual practice is not the icing on the cake. It's not the superfluous stuff. It's really core right now, I believe, to being in these times in the way that I think you and I and the people who are watching this interview want to be present in these times, to really hold that,
Mm-hmm.
to hold that, you know, that possibility that that wants to emerge on this planet, and to really tune in with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you're still receiving, you're still in touch with Kuan Yin. Yes?
Oh yes, my morning, yes, every morning. Yeah.
Yeah, so does Kuan Yin really address more of the personal things? Does she ever speak to the global
Yeah.
dynamics?
She probably would if I asked, but it seems like her work with me is to keep me in my best self, and I've lived here alone on the island now for more than 3 years, and it's been like a 3-year retreat in many, many ways. And learning, it's been a very deep dive into this interior landscape. And I've learned so much about the deep old patterns of my own fearful responses to things, and patterns of self-protection and patterns of self-deception. And it's miserable work. I mean, let's be honest. But it's tremendously powerful and tremendously liberating. Tremendously. So I think that's part of the task, is to help people around me enter into that work to the extent that they're interested and willing and is karmically appropriate.
Yeah.
But as you know, the teachers, and it was really Manjushri, insisted last fall that I write a spiritual memoir, and I furiously resisted for a couple months. I was not about to do that. Anyway, he wore me down. And so I have been doing that all since October or November. And that's been just a delight. That has been such a joy. So it's very self-organized, self-absorbed, you know. It's me thinking about they're just little short vignettes that illustrate something about undertaking that path of transformation. So that's been the other side of this, and it's crucial. It's important, and I thought it was brilliant of him to get me grounded in that work before the pandemic started up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're sort of, when you talk about looking at the old patterns and such, and working on those, and it's like you're clearing house, you're cleaning house, you're getting ready for your next arrivals. When you come back on the planet to continue this saga, you're good to go.
Well, I hope my knapsack's empty.
Well, Penny, I thank you again for doing this. And I'm so grateful to you and to Manjushri for bringing this teaching into the world. Mm-hmm. And I just sort of like, I want to hand this book out to whoever I see. It's really fabulous. Mm-hmm. So it's been great to talk.
Well, thank you. You've been a wonderful part of the birth support team.
Well, it's been wonderful to have this connection with you, and I look forward to continuing. All right. Thank you. Be well.
So blessings. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Penny and Patricia, for that insightful conversation. We certainly need all the guidance and wisdom we can find in the months and years ahead. So thank you so much, and thanks to each of you for being with us today. Thank you for being part of the Center family. So we wish you blessings in the months ahead, and we hope to be back in just a few weeks with another online program from the Center. Namaste.